Welcome back to the Liberty and Democracy podcast. We are back after a nearly one-year break, and we are currently working on building several new websites connected with this podcast. From now on, we plan on offering weekly episodes to freedom and democracy-loving people from all over the world. We're happy to continue sharing our episodes with you. Liberty and Democracy is geared toward those who seek alternative views to leftist corporate mainstream media. The podcasts shared here were created by a citizen of the United States who was born and raised in a socialist country in Eastern Europe during the 1970s and 1980s. As more and more members of our youth pivot towards Marxism, Socialism, and Communism in the United States of America and beyond, now, more than ever, it is important to focus on liberty and democracy instead of the alluring Marxist and Socialist trends which, as history repeatedly has shown, lead to repressive authoritarian regimes. Let us make it clear, Marxism does not lead to utopia either in the United States of America or anywhere else in the world. Let us question governments, policies, and manufactured social progressivism, and not go along with whatever we are told to agree to. Let us go back to the times when it was okay for us to agree to disagree. Note from Maestro Cerci. It is important to note that voting for populist politicians with the hope that they'll save us and do everything to right the wrongs of previous politicians should not excuse us from being vigilant about government and politics in general. Handing over too much power to politicians tends to take away from our freedom and liberties. We need to take our responsibilities seriously and voice our concerns while being informed voters who are active and alert. Let us be hopeful that socialism and Marxism will no longer have a subversive effect on our liberties, but at the same time we should be wary of handing over our freedom and liberties to politicians and government in general. Yes, politicians and governments should work for us and make significant changes, but taking too much power without due process may lead to abuse and a reduction in our freedoms and liberties. Remember, politicians and government work for us, and it is our job as active members of democracies to remind them of that. Thank you for listening.
The unalienable birthright of freedom. A message of truth, justice, and hope for people living under oppression. The secret of freedom lies in educating people, whereas the secret of tyranny is in keeping them ignorant. Maximilien Robespierre. To you, reading these words in the dark. Wherever you are, whether in a cramped apartment in Pyongyang, a neighborhood in Tehran, the mountains of Afghanistan, the streets of Havana, or the barrios of Caracas, know this: you were not born to be controlled. You were not born to be silenced, surveilled, imprisoned for your thoughts, or told what to believe. You were born free. That freedom is not a gift from your government. It was given to you by your Creator, and no regime on earth has the permanent power to take it away. This article is written for you, with honesty about the darkness you face, and with absolute conviction that the light will come. Part 1. Freedom is your God-given right. Throughout human history, every great civilization that has endured has recognized a truth that tyrants desperately try to bury. The rights of human beings do not come from kings, generals, or party chairmen. They come from a higher authority. The American Declaration of Independence, one of the most influential documents ever written, declared it plainly: All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These words launched a revolution, but they did not invent the idea. They simply named what humanity has always, in its deepest heart, known to be true. Every major faith tradition affirms the inherent dignity of the human person. In Christianity, every human being is made in the image of God, the Imago Dei, and therefore possesses inherent worth and dignity that no earthly authority can erase. In Islam, the concept of karamah, human dignity, is considered a sacred trust from Allah, and oppression, zulm, is among the gravest sins a ruler can commit. In Judaism, the Torah commands rulers to not oppress the stranger, recognizing that the vulnerable have rights before God that overrule the powerful. In Buddhism, the concept of Buddha nature holds that every living being contains the potential for enlightenment and freedom from suffering. These are not Western ideas. They are human ideas. They are your ideas. They belong to you. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Martin Luther King, Jr. The right to speak your mind, to practice your faith, to gather with your neighbors, to choose your leaders, to raise your children with your own values, these are not luxuries granted by benevolent governments. They are the natural inheritance of every person born into this world. When a government denies you these rights, it is not exercising legitimate authority. It is committing an injustice against God and against you. Part 2. Why democracy matters. Democracy is not simply a system of voting. It is the political expression of a profound moral truth that the people who must live under the laws should be the ones who make them. No one person, no party, no ideology is wise enough or good enough to be trusted with unlimited power over millions of human beings. History has proven this again and again with rivers of blood. In a democracy, leaders are chosen by the people through free and fair elections and can be peacefully removed when they fail. Citizens have the right to speak, write, assemble, and protest without fear of imprisonment. Courts operate independently, not as weapons of the powerful against the weak. The press is free to investigate, question, and criticize those in power. Minority groups have legal protections against the tyranny of the majority. Democracies are imperfect. They argue, they stumble, they make mistakes. But they have a built-in mechanism for self-correction that no dictatorship possesses, the peaceful transfer of power. When a democracy elects a bad leader, it can vote them out. When a dictatorship produces a bad leader or a monster, the only exits are exile, revolution, or death. Studies consistently show that democracies are more prosperous, more peaceful, more innovative, and provide longer, healthier, more fulfilling lives for their citizens. This is not an accident. When people are free, they create. When they are afraid, they merely survive. Democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others. Winston Churchill. No regime that denies its people free elections has a legitimate claim to power. None. Not the Taliban. Not the Ayatollahs of Iran. Not the Kim dynasty in North Korea. Not the Castro legacy in Cuba. not the Bolivarian socialists of Venezuela. Their power rests not on the consent of the governed, the only moral basis for government, but on force, fear, and fraud. Part 3. How oppressive regimes maintain control. To resist oppression, you must first understand it. Every authoritarian regime in the world uses the same essential toolkit, adapted to its local culture and history. Recognizing these methods is the first step toward dismantling them. The Taliban, Afghanistan. The Taliban swept back to power in Afghanistan in August 2021 after 20 years of war. Their system of control is one of the most extreme theocratic tyrannies in the modern world. They maintain power through total ideological monopoly. The Taliban claims to represent the one true interpretation of Islam, making any dissent not merely political, but religiously heretical. This is a deliberate manipulation of faith, using God as a shield for human cruelty. Elimination of women from public life. Over 20 million Afghan women and girls have been stripped of their right to education, employment, and freedom of movement. This is not Islamic law, it is the Taliban's law, enforced in God's name. Terror and public punishment. Floggings, executions, and amputations in public squares are tools of psychological terror designed to suppress not just action, but even the thought of resistance. International isolation used as a weapon. By cutting Afghanistan off from the world, the Taliban keeps its population ignorant, impoverished, and dependent, making the regime appear to be the only source of order in the chaos it created. The Afghan people are among the most resilient on earth. They have survived centuries of invasion and occupation. The Taliban's cruelty is not their destiny. The Islamic Republic, Iran. Iran's government presents itself as a divine theocracy, ruled by God, mediated through clerics. In reality, it is a sophisticated system of political control dressed in religious clothing. The tools include Vilayat-e-Faqih, guardianship of the jurist. This doctrine, invented to justify the supreme leader's absolute power, claims that clerics have divine authority to rule until the return of the hidden imam. It has no basis in mainstream Islamic theology. It is a political invention. The Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, a parallel military force loyal not to Iran but to the regime. The IRGC controls vast portions of the economy, runs prisons, suppresses protests, and exports the regime's violence abroad. Systematic suppression of dissent. The 2019 protests, the 2022 Woman, Life, Freedom, Uprising, and dozens of other mass movements have been met with bullets, mass arrests, torture, and executions. Iran's own people have repeatedly risked their lives to demand the freedoms they are owed. Control of information. Internet access is filtered, VPNs are criminalized, and journalists are imprisoned. The regime fears information the way other regimes fear armies. The courage of Iranian women who removed their hijabs in public, knowing they faced prison, is one of the great acts of defiance of the 21st century. The fire of freedom burns bright in Iran. The Communist Party, Cuba. Cuba has been ruled by a single party for over 60 years, first under Fidel Castro, then Raúl Castro, and now under leaders who carry forward the same authoritarian system. Despite the romantic mythology that some outside Cuba have attached to the revolution, the reality for ordinary Cubans is one-party rule. No opposition parties are permitted. Elections are held, but candidates are pre-selected by the Communist Party. There is no meaningful choice. Poverty as control. The state controls wages, rations food, and monopolizes housing. Economic dependence keeps citizens compliant because the alternative to obedience may be losing your ration card, your job, or your home. The CDR, Committees for the Defense of the Revolution block-by-block neighborhood surveillance networks that report on dissidents, monitor behavior, and create an atmosphere of mutual suspicion. Crushing of the July 11th movement. When Cubans took to the streets in 2021 in the largest protests in decades, shouting freedom and down with the dictatorship, the regime arrested over 700 people, tried civilians in military courts, and sentenced protesters to decades in prison. Cuba's people, talented, creative, warm, and brilliant, have been imprisoned on an island by their own government. But the spirit of freedom that drove the July 11th protests cannot be permanently extinguished. The Kim Dynasty, North Korea. North Korea is arguably the most total totalitarian state in human history. 3 generations of the Kim family have created a system so comprehensive in its control that many North Koreans have never known anything else. The mechanisms include the Jewish ideology and cult of personality. North Koreans are taught from birth that the Kim family is semi-divine, that the outside world is hostile and miserable, and that their suffering is the fault of foreign enemies. It is comprehensive psychological imprisonment. Sambun, class classification. Every North Korean is assigned a political class at birth based on their family's loyalty history. Your Sambun determines where you can live, what schools you can attend, what jobs are available to you, and whether you eat. It punishes children for the perceived sins of grandparents. The camp system. An estimated 80,000 to 120,000 people languish in political prison camps, where entire families, including children, are held for the perceived political crimes of one relative. Torture, starvation, and forced labor are systematic. Information blackout. North Korea is the most information-isolated country on Earth. Watching a foreign film can result in execution. Owning a phone capable of receiving outside signals is a death sentence. Yet, information is getting in. USB drives, smuggled radios, and balloon-delivered pamphlets are slowly piercing the wall. Many North Korean defectors who have reached freedom describe the moment they first learned the truth about the outside world as one of the most shocking, disorienting, and ultimately liberating experiences of their lives. The truth always finds a way in. Part 4. Venezuela, the Fall of a Tyrant and the Long Road Home. For over a decade, Venezuela, once one of Latin America's wealthiest nations, was ruled by Nicolas Maduro under a system of socialist authoritarianism that drove more than 8 million Venezuelans into exile, the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere's history. Maduro inherited power from Hugo Chavez in 2013 and held it through rigged elections, mass arrests, torture of dissidents, and economic catastrophe. In the July 2024 presidential election, the Venezuelan people delivered a thundering verdict. They voted for opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez by a landslide. A margin the opposition documented with tally sheets from 85% of voting machines, verified by international observers, including the Carter Center. Maduro declared himself the winner anyway. The world refused to believe him. More than 50 countries refused to recognize his victory. Then, on January 3, 2026, in an extraordinary turn of events, Nicolas Maduro was captured in a U.S. military operation and flown to New York to face federal narco-terrorism charges for allegedly using cocaine as a weapon against the United States in partnership with the FARC and other criminal organizations. He now faces justice in an American courtroom. But the story of Venezuela's freedom is not yet finished. The regime's apparatus, its intelligence services, its loyal judges, its armed paramilitaries remains in place under acting President Delcy Rodriguez, a longtime Maduro ally. The road from the fall of a tyrant to the dawn of genuine democracy is rarely straight or short. What is undeniably true is this. The Venezuelan people proved their will in 2024. They voted overwhelmingly for freedom and democracy. The international community has recognized the opposition's legitimate victory. The man who stole their election and imprisoned their protesters is no longer in the presidential palace. Opposition leaders Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado continue to press for a genuine democratic transition. The eyes of the world are watching Venezuela's transition more closely than ever before. Maduro will leave power, whether it is negotiated or not negotiated. I am focused on an orderly and peaceful transition. Maria Corina Machado, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, December 2025 inch. Venezuela's path forward will require courage, persistence, and the sustained attention of the democratic world. But for the first time in over a decade, real change is not just a dream, it is a process underway. To the Venezuelans who have suffered, who have fled, who have resisted, and who have never stopped believing, your hour is coming. Part 5. The Patterns of Tyranny and How They Yandy. Whether in Kabul or Caracas, Tehran or Havana or Pyongyang, authoritarian regimes share the same blueprint and, crucially, the same fatal weaknesses. Understanding those weaknesses is essential for anyone working toward freedom. How tyrannies are maintained. Every oppressive regime relies on some combination of these 5 pillars. 1. The monopoly on information. Control what people know and you control what they believe. Every authoritarian state invests heavily in censorship, propaganda, and education systems designed not to create critical thinkers but loyal subjects. 2. The monopoly on violence. Armies, police, secret services, and paramilitaries exist in these states not primarily to protect citizens from external enemies, but to protect the regime from its own people. 3. Economic dependency. When the state controls jobs, food, housing, and medicine, citizens face a terrible calculation, resist and risk starvation, or comply and survive. Poverty is not a failure of these systems, it is a feature. 4. Division and fear. Regimes cultivate informants, punish collective action, and keep citizens isolated from each other. When you cannot trust your neighbor, you cannot organize. 5. Manufactured legitimacy, held elections, religious blessing, nationalist mythology, and external scapegoats, whether America, Israel, capitalism, or Western imperialism, are used to convince citizens and the world that the regime has a right to exist. How tyrannies fall. But here is what history teaches with absolute clarity. They fall. Every single one of them, eventually. Some collapse from within when elites defect and the security apparatus fragments. Some are overwhelmed by popular uprisings that grow too large and too widespread to suppress. Some are pressured from without by international sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and targeted support for internal dissidents. Some are swept away by economic collapse that destroys the regime's ability to buy loyalty. And sometimes, as Venezuela is now experiencing, the fall comes in dramatic and unexpected ways. The Berlin Wall fell overnight. The Soviet Union dissolved in months. Apartheid ended not through war but through negotiation and courage. The dictators of Eastern Europe fled in a single extraordinary season in 1989. Each of these seemed impossible right up until the moment it happened. It always seems impossible until it is done. Nelson Mandela. Part 6. A Message of Hope. To every person living under the boot of oppression. You are not alone. Across the world, there are millions of people who think of you, pray for you, advocate for you, and work every day to bring the pressure of international attention and moral clarity to bear on the systems that oppress you. The voices of dissidents who have reached freedom carry your story to the world. Human rights organizations document your suffering, so it cannot be denied. Governments in free nations debate what more they can do to support you. The information blockade is crumbling. The Internet, even in its filtered and restricted forms, is piercing every wall. North Koreans are watching South Korean dramas on smuggled USBs and learning that the outside world is not the hellcape their government described. Iranians are organizing through encrypted apps. Cubans broadcast their protests live from their phones before the signal is cut. Afghans are running secret schools for girls in private homes, defying the Taliban one child at a time. Freedom movements have always been led by ordinary people who simply decided, one day, that enough was enough. Rosa Parks was a tired seamstress. Nelson Mandela was a lawyer. Václav Havel was a playwright. Aung San Suu Kyi was a housewife living under house arrest. The people who change history rarely look like heroes before they begin. They simply act. Here is what we know about the world you are living in. International sanctions against oppressive regimes have been tightened and expanded in recent years, targeting the wealth of elites who prop up these systems. More defectors, exiles, and refugees than ever before are telling their stories to the world, stripping away the myths that protect these regimes. Civil society organizations inside and outside these countries continue to document abuses, building the legal and historical record that will one day serve justice. The global democratic community, imperfect and inconsistent as it is is more aware than ever of the tools of repression and more committed to supporting those who resist. Your suffering is real. The fear you live with every day is real. The losses you have endured, family members imprisoned, futures stolen, lives constrained, are real. We do not minimize any of it. But so is the fall of the Berlin Wall. So is the end of apartheid. So is the defeat of Marcos in the Philippines, of Pinochet in Chile, of Milosevic in Serbia. So is the capture of Maduro, a man who once seemed untouchable. So is the spreading knowledge, seeping through every digital crack in every information wall on Earth, that there is another way to live. Hope is being able to see that there is light despite all of the darkness. Desmond Tutu. The arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice. Not because justice is inevitable or guaranteed, it is not, but because human beings, made in the image of God, cannot ultimately be made to forget what they are. Every child born into oppression is born with the same spark that was born into the children of the American Revolution, the French Resistance, the Solidarity movement in Poland, and every freedom movement in history. That spark is in you. It cannot be legislated away. It cannot be tortured out of you. It cannot be starved into submission. It is who you are. A final word. The Taliban did not begin powerful. They were a collection of students and fighters. The Ayatollahs did not seem invincible before 1979. Fidel Castro landed on Cuba with 82 men. Kim Il-sung was installed by a foreign army. Maduro was a bus driver before he was a dictator. These regimes are built by human beings, and they can be dismantled by human beings. The day will come, and it is coming, when Afghan girls will sit in universities again. When Iranians will choose their own leaders without the veto of unelected clerics. When Cubans will read and say and write whatever they believe. When North Koreans will finally see, with their own eyes, the world that was hidden from them. When Venezuela will be governed by the leaders its people actually chose. That day is not yet here, but it is closer than it was yesterday. And every act of quiet courage, every forbidden book read, every truth spoken in a whisper, every secret school convened, every ballot cast with trembling hands, brings it closer still. You were made for freedom. Do not stop believing it. Written in solidarity with all who yearn to breathe free.